Is the mic on? Episode 95. What's wrong with Orny Adams? I'll tell you what's right. I got to make my own coffee this morning at home. That's my favorite thing to do. You travel as much as I do. It's like the little things I appreciate. I was in Atlanta, Georgia last weekend doing a Teen Wolf convention. In this hotel, got a lot of nerve. I'll start with this. A bagel was $8.50. A bagel and cream cheese. The coffee was $5 something. We're at $6 something. We're at $15 for a bagel. And this is the only options really in the lobby. There's nowhere you can walk to. But here's what happened. I go downstairs the first day and the woman's wearing gloves. You know these gloves that people think is more sanitary? It's less sanitary because you don't wash your hands anymore. Like if you were handling things and you felt like your hands were dirty, you'd wash them. But when you have the gloves, you never wash. So they just stay on. So I'm observing the behavior. I watch her ring in my $35 bagel and cream cheese and coffee. And then she takes my money. I'm paying in cash. And I watch her then proceed to cut my bagel with the same gloves that she didn't change them. You're supposed to change it. Supposed to ring it in, take the cash, change the gloves, now put on food gloves. So I'm thinking, how long have these gloves been on for? So I take the bagel and cream cheese and the coffee, and I'm thinking, I'm not going to eat this. I'm too weirded out. And I come back because I forgot to put something, I needed like a little extra sugar in my coffee. I come back. She's got the same gloves on, and now she's moving the mop bucket and mopping the floor with the gloves. You know what I did? I went over to the hotel buffet. I left my bagel there. I put in a fresh bagel, which I'm sure was touched by glove bucket woman prior to this, but I don't know that, so I'm going to eat it. I made my own bagel at the buffet. I didn't tell anybody, and then I just walked out. People look at me like, who's the bagel guy? Who just stole a bagel? That's what's wrong with the world. That's what's wrong with traveling. My guest today, I'm excited to have you on. I've heard a lot about you. You say we met in Aspen. I
remember seeing you walking away, and I remember watching the documentary, but I didn't want to bother you because you had a bunch of fans talking to you. So,
yeah, I'm a big deal.
Yeah.
I'm a big deal.
Yes.
My guest today, Yoshi, I'm not even going to try and say.
Obayashi. But,
Obayashi.
There we go. Yeah.
See? Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. My guest, do you really believe your father was murdered?
Hold
on.
Yeah.
What's wrong with Orny Adams? Episode 95. Coming at you, recording from Big Yellow. Rubber gloves. Goodbye. My guest today is Yoshi Obayashi. Yeah. Originally from Japan. Your story is so, I'm bringing this down, your story is so remarkable. It makes me a skeptic.
Because it's so weird, or?
It's just so remarkable that, and we'll go over it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll start here. As a child, you grew up in Osaka, Japan, right?
Right.
And your father, instead of bedtime stories, would tell you about murders, sexual assault cases, and things that happened like cannibalism and starvation in World War II.
Yeah. Well, first of all,
I think that
I think
creates an interesting beginning for
life. I think part of the reason my dad was that way, we're ethnically Korean growing up in Japan. So we are what we call Zainichi Koreans. And I think when you're outsider living in Japan, you're treated differently. You have to have a bit of a sense of humor and morbid way of looking at things, you know. I think it's the way
Who looks down on who?
What?
The Japanese look down on the Koreans, or do the Koreans look down on the Japanese?
Japanese. I mean, not, things are a lot better now, but it's a long, complicated history. But Japan occupied South Korean peninsula after Russo-Japanese War in 1905. And so the Russians and Japanese were fighting over the Korean peninsula. So what was interesting, Japanese sneak attack and destroy Port Arthur, which is a port for Russians. And at the time, Teddy Roosevelt, president, thought this was such a brilliant move. Of course, years later, when Japanese attacked the United States, we didn't think that was brilliant.
Right. How old were you when you left Japan? You immigrated to the United States, or did you go somewhere else first?
USA. I didn't. first of all, I didn't know I was immigrating to the States. My mother basically kidnapped myself and my younger brother. So she told us in March 13th, 1980, that we're flying from Osaka, Japan to Tokyo.
Uh-huh.
And I was trying to figure out, like, why are we flying over? We could just take bullet train. Well, when we woke up next day, we're in Hawaii. And that's when my mom told us that she and my dad were divorced. And that's how we found out.
Okay, this story just gets weirder
Weird, yeah.
and weirder and less believable. Your dad took you to Ted Bundy's childhood home in the summer of 1979. So you must have reconnected with your father. You immigrated to the U.S. on March 13th, 1980. John Wayne Gacy was found guilty that day.
Yeah.
Okay. You moved to L.A. the summer of 1985, landing in Long Beach. On the night that either the second or third Asian person was murdered by Richard Ramirez. You're definitely obsessed with murder.
Yeah.
Right? You suspect your father was murdered, which we'll talk about in a second. And we'll get into all this stuff. You attended Giselle Maxwell, Ghislaine. Is it Ghislaine?
Ghislaine, I believe so.
Ghislaine Maxwell's verdict and sentencing. You attended Elizabeth Holmes's sentencing.
Yeah.
You attended the Danny Masterson, Harvey Weinstein cases. And just 2 weeks ago, we were texting, you were at Sam Bankman-Fried's.
I went to the, not last Thursday, but one before that. Yeah.
Why are you so obsessed with crime and murder?
Well, I think, some kids have a connection with their dads playing baseball or maybe watching movies, but that's something what my dad was interested in. And so it's one of the few intimate things I used to do with my dad. But let's be honest, murder is also one of the most intimate thing you could do to someone, and
is it intimate when somebody, like a mass shooting, do you believe that's intimate?
I think it's more intimate when you're strangling somebody, like some of the big serial killers that have been covered in the States,
Right.
But I think my dad had a morbid sense of humor because you kind of have to when you're ethnically Korean growing up in Japan. Things are so bad for them. But,
Well, why are you in Japan? Why didn't you stay in Korea? Why didn't your father stay in Korea, or your family?
My dad was born in Japan. And I was born in Japan, but when my parents got divorced, my mom kidnapped myself and my younger brother in 1980. So summer of 79, 6 months before we were kidnapped, or 8 months, my grandmother was dying from cancer in Washington State. So, of course, they would never tell my grandmother she was dying from cancer because that's a typical Asian thing. They would never tell their grandparents that they're dying.
Wasn't your grandmother like at the hospital with the doctor? Wouldn't the doctor tell her?
She doesn't speak English, and they would never. Asian people will never.
Why is that? What does that mean? I don't get that. I've never heard that.
This is very common among Asian people that because you disturb them, you'll make them unhappy. So family make a family decision for their grandparents.
But wouldn't you like to know why you're throwing up blood?
Yeah, but yes, but there's a lot of group thinking among Asian people. They think telling our grandmother or grandfather that they're dying from cancer would be very upsetting to them, so they make the decision for them.
Huh.
So I think we were here the summer of 79. I think second or third day in Tacoma, Washington. It's my mother's side of family. We were dealing with my grandmother's cancer. So my dad, when he had a day when he was free, he took myself, got a taxi, and we drove to, I believe, Ted Bundy's childhood home. So there's like 2 or 3 buildings in Tacoma, Washington. They're uncle's house, his mother's house, and
grandmother. He stayed with his grandmother, I believe, didn't he? Bundy? Maybe that was in Philadelphia area.
You're right, because his mother got pregnant. She flew to New Hampshire, gave birth, because it was a shameful thing to have a child without being married. And when she returned, I believe she pretended like she was Ted Bundy's older sister or aunt. And I think her mother pretended like Ted Bundy's mother. I can't remember, but he never understood who was his mother and aunt.
Really?
Yeah. It's very similar to Jack Nicholson's situation too. His aunt was actually his mom, if I remember right.
Really?
Yeah. There's a lot of shameful things to give it.
All right. Let's start from you. Let's go back here.
Yeah.
You're in Japan.
Yeah.
You're Korean, but you're living in Japan.
Yeah.
Your mom kidnaps you at age what?
10.
10. Have you ever been back to Japan?
Yes, early 90, and then 2003. and I finally returned 8 months ago, 7 months ago, first time in 19 and a half years.
And do you, after you're kidnapped, any communication with your father?
No, not really, because my cousin and relative told me that my dad didn't want us, and that's why they brought it. But I didn't realize until 5 years later that was a lie.
Yeah.
Asian people just lie,
Yeah, what's going on here?
That the parents lies all the time,
Really?
I think anything that is embarrassing, they'd rather lie and prevent that knowledge to spread,
Yeah. Are you sure that's really your dad?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, if Jack Nicholson finds out later that biologically that's not his mother, it's his aunt or something,
yeah.
like maybe that wasn't your dad.
Oh, no, that was my dad.
That was.
Yeah.
But somehow you reconnected with him in America because he took you to Ted Bundy's house.
No. That was summer before I was kidnapped. So he took me to Ted Bundy's house in 1979. I was kidnapped in 1980. So
Were you kidnapped from America or Japan?
from Japan and flew into the United States in 1980. So summer of 79, we were visiting USA for like a month because
Okay.
my grandmother was dying.
Okay.
And when we returned to Japan, I think 7-8 months later, my mother kidnapped myself and my younger brother after her mom passed away. So once her mom passed away, she knew that she could just leave.
Okay.
Because she was telling her, like, don't get divorced, stay with your husband. But once she passed away,
Right.
she basically had permission to leave.
Okay. And then how long after that did your father die? And did he die in Japan?
He died in summer of 2003. Yeah.
How old were you?
At the time, I was 34.
Okay. And was it in Japan or the U.S.?
He died in Japan. So, January of 2003, I reconnect. I went to see my dad again. Like 1990, 91, 92, and then I didn't see my dad for like 10 years, 10, 12 years. And in 2003, I flew back because the whole time my stepmother was having an affair with somebody else and took advantage of my dad. So my dad was left with tons of debt, and he didn't know how to deal with the whole situation. And I was really angry with him because he tolerate people treat him bad. You have to stand up for yourself.
Yeah.
And looking back, I was really wrong because some people are not able to defend themselves. The reality is, I, on the other hand, is just like my mother, and my mother is a very violent person. So
How so?
well, I talked about it in Joe Rogan's, but I don't mind because you don't know, so it's probably. So when my dad died, August of 2003, I got an email from my cousin. He just wrote two words in my email: "Papa dead." That's how they notify him the fact that my dad died. And they found my dad's body, and he was hanging from ceiling for like so long that he looked like one of the Marvel character. What's that? Oh my god!
I don't watch cartoons.
It's one of the characters. It's completely dark.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was so dark from decomposing, and summer in Japan is really relentless and hot and humid. So anyway, when I got there, we couldn't figure out if this was suicide or murder. Because one of my cousin's wife, her brother is like Korean version of FBI. And my stepmother claimed the whole time she was in Korea, but we found out the last time they saw my dad alive, that same night, my stepmother and her family flew in from Korea to Japan. Now, it could be circumstantial, but she did all kinds of terrible things. Either led him to commit suicide or she has something to do with the murder.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in Japan, they don't do autopsy unless the family asks for it, and she didn't ask for that.
Huh.
And
why would she if she
has
was
something to do with-
involved?
Yeah.
And
And
I'm just thinking because somebody in another Asian country confided in me in the last week, and it sounds like such a similar story.
Oh, is that
And
right?
They can't get the answers.
Yeah.
There's corruption, and it's who bribes who.
Yeah.
In order to the death certificate or the result of the autopsy can be determined by payment. So my mind drifted for a second because I thought I've heard this before.
And she had him cremated right away.
Yeah, never
And
a good sign.
there's a great show on HBO called Tokyo Vice,
Mhm.
and a guy who wrote those stories that based on the show is a guy named Jake Adelstein, and he is American, I think from Missouri. He went to Japan like 30 years ago. I think he went there originally for like anime and karate or whatever.
Yeah.
But
That's why we all go.
he went. He realized he had aptitude in Japanese, and he was the first non-Japanese to get a job at one of the prestigious newspaper covering crimes. Hence, there was some big criminal case that he wrote a book about. It became Tokyo Vice, which became a TV show.
Right.
The reason I'm mentioning it to him, I tweeted to him one time and saying, here's my dad's circumstance. I think a lot of times when somebody murders someone in Japan, they make it look like it's a suicide, and the police do not do any sort of like investigation, autopsy.
Right.
And he said, like, unfortunately, that's there's a lot of truth in that. So,
Had you had any communication with him prior to this?
I saw him in January, and I didn't understand.
When was the death?
That well, we found his body in August of 2003, and then last time I saw him January 2003. So within that 7 months, something happened to him. But my dad, it's humiliating. My stepmother would say stuff like, "Hey, my cousin's going to be visiting me and staying with us for a couple months," and we found out later on that wasn't her cousin. It was her lover. So while my dad was working, she was fucking the guy at the house and everything.
Wow.
So she did all kinds of stuff like that. And
How was she violent?
oh no, my mother's violent.
Yeah, how was your mother violent?
Well, she used to hit us whenever we do small. My dad never hit us. He was
Yeah.
very gentle. And at the funeral, I ended up. So we went to funeral, and my it's the middle of nowhere. It's like the cemetery is some mountainous area, and the whole family was there. And my aunt and we took all our servings. You have to present it to the dead, and we went up to 3 level of steps, like really higher up in the mountain to my dad's cemetery. And I saw my stepmother, and of course my aunt said terrible things, and like, "You fucking killed my brother." And as soon as she left, I was so shocked that my stepmother by herself, because she doesn't know my reputation. So I ended up, I didn't plan to do it, but I ended up beating her up to the point where I almost killed her. And I stopped beating her when I heard somebody working at the cemetery scream, because I blacked out. I was literally beating her up. And after that, I just ran out of there. And I assaulted my stepmother's nephew, sister, and brother-in-law. And then I took off. And
And you did this because you suspected she murdered your
either
father.
she murdered my dad, or did so many terrible things to lead him to commit suicide.
Yeah.
So
let me ask-
scenario, he killed himself. The worst scenario, that she killed him.
And do you have any qualms or apprehensions about admitting that you beat up a woman? Does that
No.
concern you? No. And why is that?
Um,
Because it made me, I got that uncomfortable feeling. And
yeah, I think maybe that's just growing up in Japan and Asia. But I think I don't know. My couple of my friends said maybe that's my Korean blood or whatever, But that
that's why they don't want you in Japan.
the whole revenge culture, I think some culture are famous for that, like Italians are like kind of famous for that,
So would it be looked down upon in Japanese culture that you beat up your stepmom, or is that part of the revenge culture?
I don't think that's a kind of look up to. I don't think Japanese like that, but I think it's interesting. Most of my Korean friends said that they would have done the same thing. But yeah, it's. I didn't really want to talk about that, But when I was on Joe Rogan's pod, he says, "Is it okay to bring up?" I was like, "Sure." And I brought it up. You know what's interesting? I was really worried the backlash against saying that in 2012. But I don't remember the vast majority of the emails I got after that pod in 2012. They would tell me things like, similar thing happened with my mother with my stepfather, or similar thing happened with my dad with his stepmother. And I got emails from all over the world. Like, they wish they could do the same thing. But only reason I technically got away, because I did that in another country. I don't live there anymore.
Yeah.
If I did something like that here, I'll be serving quite a long time, because I assaulted 4 people,
Right.
And
Do you worry about retribution or them revenging you?
I wasn't really worried, but I'm surprised they never did anything. And you know what happened? Years later, I have cousin, a second, is a third cousin. I have a relative in Tokyo, and their distant relative somehow that side of the family know my stepmother, and I got a message from them like 3 4 years ago. They said that they understand why I did it, but they like to move on, and they said they forgive me.
Oh,
And um, but I told them, well, first of all, they're in no position to forgive me because I'm not asking for. I'm not
forgiveness.
going to apologize, and and I think the part that surprised me that they were more afraid of me than trying to do something to me. You know.
Was it uncontrollable rage? Like you blacked out? Were you conscious? Was this sort of like, I'm going to hit you now and hit you now and hit you now? Could you have stopped yourself? Would you have beaten one of them to death if you could have?
I was a little surprised myself because flying back, I was really angry. I mean, I was angry with her, but I was also angry with my dad allowing her to treat him like that. Because the more you let somebody treat like that, it can escalate to the point where they keep doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing. You know?
So is there shame
Yeah, sure.
that your dad allowed that?
Yes, I don't really like that. You know, and here's another thing. You might find it interesting. So in Japan, we have a thing called ijime, IJIME. So it's really malignant form of bullying, like picking on kids. And in Japan, you don't want to be different from everyone. You have to be like everyone else, right? So if you stick out, the group feel like they need to pick on you to the point you change to be like everyone else.
Wow.
Unfortunately, these things get to the point where, like for example, in Japan, first week of September is the most dangerous time for kids because a lot of kids kill themselves. They don't want to go back to school, and if they act different, they look different. They feel like they get attacked. Things are even worse now. Unlike when I was a kid, if you're getting picked on, ijime, you could confront those kids and fight them eventually to the point where they'll stop beating you up.
Right.
It's worse now because even if you decide not to go to school, because social media, they could attack you.
Right.
Even when you're at the comfort of home. That's something I never have to deal with when I was a kid. You know?
Right. In fact, I'm going to talk about that at the end. I actually have an article that I wanted to discuss with
Yeah.
you that was in the New York Times. And we're going to discuss Sam Bankman-Fried. But I'm fascinated by your
Yeah.
openness and what you've been through. Because I'll be honest with you, when you sent all this information ahead of time, I said, this can't be real. But I'm looking at you, you're 2 feet away from me.
Yeah.
I'm praying that you don't punch me.
No, I
And
mean, no.
yeah.
I have a high tolerance, like when people are misbehaving and stuff. It just,
But I can
anything to do with your families and friends, you're very sensitive about that. You know? And I didn't. It's really difficult to reconcile because on one hand, I'm mad at my dad for letting people treat him like that. But years later, I realized not everyone is able to defend themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's hard for me to admit.
I don't know any of the circumstances, but
Yeah.
is it possible that your father did kill himself, but you want to believe that he was murdered so it takes away some of the shame?
I think there's some truth in that. Yeah. I mean, do I know for sure? No, I really don't. What is fact is that remember I was telling you, like, they wouldn't tell my grandmother she's dying of cancer. Some of my family members would never tell me these things that were going on until he passed away. They finally told me the truth. But those information really doesn't help me when he's dead,
Yeah.
And no, maybe I was frustrated my father was dead and she was treating him terrible. And I'll be also honest, when I met her first couple of times, she was very polite. But after a while, she'll make these snide comments like, I didn't really like that. I don't know who the hell you think you are talking to me that way. But my dad should have said something to her, but he's pretty weak when it comes to that kind of stuff, And
Why do you use the word weak? Like maybe it's he wants to avoid conflict, or who knows what. Maybe it didn't bother him as much. I just think maybe there's a way to reframe it and rethink it. So
I think you're right. I think that might be more Japanese thing because Japanese do not like conflicts at all. But I grew up here, and do you know Bill Parcells, the
yeah, of
football
course.
coach?
I'm from New England.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm from Boston. We discussed that before. Yeah.
I love Bill Parcells because he said confrontation is wonderful because it cleared the air. When you confront people and tell them if they have an issue with you, that everybody knows that there's a problem. Then once you clear the air by saying there's a problem, then you got to figure out how to resolve this. Asian people, especially Japanese, won't do that, And I think maybe I brought a little bit of that confrontational stuff back to Japan. But what I know, and my stepmother was very abusive, and nobody told me for years until it was a little too late,
Well, you're fascinated by crime, so you understand there's that Svengali theory, or you fall in love with your captor. Like, I mean, you look at cults.
Yeah,
These
Stockholm
people
syndrome. And things
Stockholm
like that,
syndrome. They're being abused.
Yeah,
they're being controlled. So that is very much possible.
Yeah, I'm not saying my dad was perfect, but my dad was gentle. I think he was a little trusting of people, and I think.
I mean, if you think about it.
Yeah.
And I don't want. I'm not trying to bum you out, and I can see in your face.
Yeah.
This is all still very
I thought
painful.
about it so many different scenarios, but.
But your mom kidnapping you.
Yeah.
Is a form of abuse against your father. What? Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Like, why? Why did he allow that, or why? I understand you were kidnapped, but think about that.
I thought about that one, and so that's a really good question. I think I'm saying this first time. I was wondering, like, first couple years, why didn't he fly in and get us? But he just never had it in him. I forgot to tell you, when I was second and third grade, my mother left my dad. So one day, she got all her stuff and me and my younger brother away from home, and I didn't live with my dad for like a year and a half. So that has happened before. So this is like really when we moved to States, it was second time around when my mother did it. But yeah, they got married. I think my mother probably was kind of forced to marry. And I don't want to say one person was more right than other, because when people marry, all kinds of things happen that you don't know. Right, you really don't know. Yeah. But I think both of my parents were not doing very well, and they were doing so poorly that I don't think they could think about what was best for their kids, So.
Yeah. Did you ever have the opportunity to ask your dad, how you felt when we were kidnapped? Did you want nothing to do with us?
Oh, yeah, I did talk to him, but my dad's not very talkative. He kind of keep it to himself, but yeah, he was devastated, I think he knew, because a couple months before my mother kidnapped, he returned to apartment. He just broke down, and he wouldn't tell me why, but I think he knew that something was up, and they wouldn't tell me, And when we landed in Hawaii in March of 1980,
you're how old then?
10, and that's when my mother told me that they were divorced. See, there was a period when my mom took us away from my dad from second and third grade, and when we reconnected again, I was so hopeful that maybe thing was resolved, everything's go back to normal. But when my grandmother passed away, that's when my mom took myself and my younger brother.
Right, you said that before, and also what I think is interesting is the use of the word kidnapping.
Yeah,
like you just said, took us away.
Yeah,
that's a softening of the.
Well, yeah.
But you believe you were kidnapped.
I didn't use the word kidnap in a long time, but when I tell my friends, like, did your mom notify your dad that they're bringing you and your brother over here? Like, no. So I'm assuming that's the proper definition.
Yeah, probably legally. Do you resent your mom?
I think if you would have asked me 20 years ago, yeah, but I think last 10 years, I think I learned a lot about mental illness, and I was really wrong about a lot of things, I'm sure I'm still wrong about a lot of things, but they just never. You just Asian folks do not talk about this stuff at all. You know,
Even the Americanized.
I think that's a little different, but in Japan, if you say you have cancer, nobody's going to feel bad for you. But if you say your mother have a schizophrenia or something, the shame is so profound. And that's why suicide is very, very high in Japan. And it's almost seem acceptable form of dealing with your mental illness, you know. I think that's why I used to do a podcast with a guy named David Cho. He's a very famous street artist.
Yeah.
And he's a very controversial guy. He got canceled multiple times last 10, 12 years. I think the reason why so many people like DVD Essay and KGB podcasts like 11, 12 years ago, it was just so raw conversation.
Yeah.
We were talking about our problems. And I think it was really shocking to Asian Americans and Asians overseas. I got even recognized by Asian folks in Frankfurt, Germany, because nobody really talked about that stuff at the level we were talking.
Most Americans aren't comfortable talking about it.
Yeah.
At that level.
And I mean, I ended up doing stand-up, but you know, I think when I started, actually, I was doing a lot of Toastmaster and public speech.
Yeah.
And the stuff I was talking made people uncomfortable.
I can see that.
And
what were you talking about?
Just like my aunt married a Norwegian American person, and he used to be a lawyer. I used to do his paperwork and deliver like divorce paper and things like that. And I remember reading. I wasn't supposed to, but I got bored. I will sometimes read his files.
Yeah.
I will only read like rape cases or murders and things like that. And when you see those clients walk into the office, like, oh my God, this guy allegedly raped somebody or murdered someone, you know?
Yeah.
And I guess I was really attracted to those darkness. So I would talk about things that happened during World War II or some of the murder cases and things like that, you know?
Yeah.
I think you want to protect kids, not talk about these things, but gradually when they get older, you kind of have to expose a little bit of that so you could prepare them for the world.
Yeah.
The way the world really is. You don't want to scare them, but you want to teach enough street smart, you know. But I think I went overboard during public speaking. You know, they're really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So when
I could see that.
Yeah.
Do you feel that people look at you and think, I bet he's murdered somebody?
Sometimes people say stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I think Oscar Wilde said that if you want to tell people truth, do it. If you could make people laugh while you're telling them, you could get away with that. But if you don't make them laugh, you're in danger.
You're going to jail.
Or some people don't want to hear the truth. But if you make people laugh, you can do that. So I think you can talk about dark stuff on stage if you make them laugh.
Right.
You know, and I think dark humor is necessary. It's important because sometimes people get mad. Some of the subject matter I talk on stage or podcast. But to me, when you meet like police officers, paramedics, doctors, sex assault counselors, they use dark humor because without it, they can't continue to do their jobs, you know. And I'm sure Mr. Clemente, being an FBI profiler, he probably have to have not because they're insensitive. You have to have a sense of humor or else you go mad.
Yeah,
you
that's
know?
why he you know, I did a show at the Improv in
Yeah.
Hollywood, and he saw the show,
Yeah.
and he tweeted at me, kept tweeting at me. Then he'd watch my clips and watch my stand-up or come to other shows.
Yeah.
And I looked, and he said, former FBI profiler. I wonder if this guy's real. So I reached out, I said, come on my podcast. And the first discussion we ever had was on my podcast.
Yeah.
And he just told me a few things that he couldn't talk about
Sure.
because he said, I put a lot of bad people away.
Yeah.
People will come for me. He's very honest, but he has seen so much. You know, he was there right after 9/11 cleaning up the remains and, you know, got cancer from that.
Yeah.
He's seen a lot. He interrogated the 9/11 terrorist at Gitmo. And exactly, he said, he comes to my shows all the time. I'm like, what are you doing? And now he actually comes and he sells my merchandise after the shows. But he needs that relief.
Yeah, so whenever I say something that is, somebody got mad because I made a reference to Ghislaine Maxwell, and when she spoke at her sentencing, and I don't know exactly what I said that upset this person, but she think I was normalizing what Ghislaine was doing. No, that's not what I'm doing. It's so horrific. If you have to make some kind of humor to be exposed to this darkness, kind of continue on, and people who complains about this dark humor, they don't really do anything. They only complain. But paramedics and people who work in those field, it's their willingness to risk their lives, and they work really hard. But that humor is what help them continue on, because if you don't, it is a.
But Giselle, or what is it? How do we say it? Ghislaine?
Well, I've been saying Ghislaine. That's what
Ghislaine, that's right. Okay, Ghislaine is a perfect example of, I don't believe if she had never met Jeffrey Epstein that she would have acted in that way. I believe that was sort of the Stockholm Syndrome. Like, she fell in love and she was in a cult of Jeffrey Epstein and became an accomplice and did horrible things, very horrible things. But I don't think, had she not met him, maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
I think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. I think, well, her father was Robert Maxwell, media tycoon. He was very domineering and a very difficult guy.
And probably murdered too.
Probably murdered. And he was a difficult guy because a Jewish person growing up in, I think, former Czechoslovakia. And basically, his whole family was wiped out and suffered starvation. And I think I even heard like he was a difficult and a kind of miserable person. Except there's a few times people caught him watching like a Holocaust documentary, and he was watching it, desperately hoping to see a footage of his family. And it's one of the sensitive things for him. And I think because he had a difficult upbringing, he was trying to, I think, toughen up his kids. Unfortunately for Ghislaine, she was born in Christmas in 1961. That week, his favorite son was involved in a car accident. So they neglect her first couple months of her life because they were so concerned with the older son. And I think she needed her father's approval. So when he passed away, I think Jeffrey Epstein was a substitute father for her. So I think you're right. I think she needed to find somebody to help her. And I'm sure she lived a very entitled life. So she needed to find another man who is able to provide her with that kind of lifestyle. So if it wasn't Jeffrey Epstein, it would have been somebody else. And she might have committed different kind of crime, whoever she was associated at the time. She just happened to be with Jeffrey. Yeah. And his thing was underage girls, and I have a couple of theories about that personally.
What are those?
So my really weird theory about Jeffrey Epstein is that interesting thing with him and Ted Kaczynski. By the way, Unabomber. I went to his where he used to live, Lincoln, Montana. I went to his the library that he used to do research and things like that. But
you're obsessed with murder.
And terrorism, things like that.
By the way, a lot of people are obsessed with murder, but I'm going to watch Dateline in 48 hours and documentaries.
Sure.
But you're going to these trials, and I want to talk about that too after you give this theory. But I want to know what is that like? Like, how many days did you go to the Ghislaine Maxwell trial?
I think I went 10, 12 days. So
is it hard to get in?
Well, it was height of the COVID, right? So every day there's only 8 spots. So 4 civilians and for 4 journalists. Well, what happened is when you fill up 4 journalists, the journalists will pretend like civilians to try to sneak in. Yeah. So every day when I tried to get in, I couldn't get in. So if you don't get the 8th spot, they take you to secondary room where the room looks just like the courtroom in the 3rd floor. Mm-hmm. You're in the 1st floor at the Southern District Court in New York. The room looks exactly like the actual room, with each seat have a TV monitor. So you're sitting down, you're actually hearing and watching the case. Oh. So every day I'm going, and I will miss. So I got fucking tired of missing. So December 29th, I got there like 1 a.m. I'm standing in line, and there's 3 people ahead of me, and they're professional standing. So they were standing for some other journalists getting paid to do that. Yeah. But I'm broke, so I have to stand in. And the lady who was ahead of me, when she paid the person to stand in, Julie K. Brown, she's the one who wrote the Miami Herald article that asked the question, like, why did Jeffrey Epstein got such a small punishment for that case in 2007 and 8. That article led to a bunch of people getting fired later on, you know.
Wow.
So I got in, and I didn't realize at the time that was the day they got the verdict, because it was dragging for 2-3 days.
Were you in the actual courtroom with her the day of the verdict?
Yes.
You were.
Yeah. That's the first.
What is that like?
It's pretty crazy, because I read Jeffrey Epstein article on Vanity Fair, 2003. A lady named Vicky Ward wrote that article. Now they didn't put any of the sexual stuff, because he threatened the editor of Vanity Fair and Vicky Ward, legal repercussion, things like that. And I thought, what an interesting article. Then when that Miami Herald article was released, I read it, and I was just kind of stunned by how many molestation victims, and he got what for punishment? You know, none of that stuff makes sense. So every time I was opening for Russell Peters in Miami, I go Palm Beach, and I went to his house. I went to his house in New York City, Upper East Side.
Why?
Because I don't think it's just enough to read these stories. You really have to go to the place that they lived, go to local diners where they eat, where they shop. I want to know. I want to get a feel like what's it like to live in that
You're
area.
stalking criminals.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
But why? Why do you want to know that much? Why do you want to feel a closeness to a horrible person like that?
I didn't realize what I was doing. I mean, once again, this kind of stuff was passed down from my dad, you know?
Yeah.
So maybe it's my way of
connecting with him.
Reconnecting with my dad. Like some people have connection with their dad watching baseball games, so they continue on. But I think, especially like the last 4 or 5 years, I've been to 70 countries, you know, and I saw so much misery in the world. We're so lucky to live in the United States. I mean, it's unbelievable how lucky we are to live here. And that poverty and misery is so terrible. My conclusion is most of the problems stem from super rich people making decisions that's horrible for most average and middle class people, you know. And I'm obsessed with Epstein and all the people associated with him, because they have so much influence what happened to the middle class and poor people in this country and the whole world. And that there was a unwritten rule when the rich people feel obligated to help the poor, but that's gone now, you know. And that's why I think when I study Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein, you understand where most of the human misery come from.
Really?
It's from those people, yeah. I believe that.
How are they making decisions that affect us, me? I understand most rich people.
Yeah.
And how that happens.
So, for example, someone like Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, I have no issue, or Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
They produce goods and service that people like. They make billions because they actually made a positive impact on the rest of the world. I think problem during the financial crisis, when these super rich people made a decision, brought financial chaos. You see, there's no consequence for those super rich people, because when they make such a colossal bet and mistake, they know that U.S. government will bail them out. And who ended up paying for that bailout? Middle class and poor people. But if they make a right bet, they make all the money and they reap the benefit from it. So the super rich never lose in that. You know, they would throw like a guy like Bernie Madoff for symbolic punishment, but there's so many others got away with their, just financial.
Well, like all the people that went to Epstein's pedophile island.
Yeah.
When is that going to come out? When's that going to come out? When are those people going on trial, or the truth about who went there and may have been involved with pedophilia? When does that come out? Or do the rich people keep that under?
When you work in the sex business, and I know a lot of prostitutes and porn stars, and they're having sex with tons of super rich people, you know. And sometimes I had a friends who work in newspaper in New York City. They say, hey, do you have a hot gossip? Then I was saying like, well, this X, Y, and Z person's doing this, and he's beating up these female prostitutes, you know. And when I told this one particular story, other side was quiet, and I said, like, are you there? Like, yeah. what's going on? Like, well, I work with that person's son. I can't talk about that person.
Yeah.
And I think what happened is the reason why this is something probably not be talked about, because both liberal and conservative people abuse women and kids, and it's not their interest to talk about it. So I don't think that's one thing I learned hanging out in Upper East Side. That I mean, this is such a terrible thing to say, but you could fuck poor kids, but you cannot fuck with rich people's kids. There's a dire consequence doing that.
Wow.
So I think Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein know that that's why they got away with abusing kids in Palm Beach area.
They were on the wrong side of the tracks.
Yeah.
They were on one side, and on the other side.
Oh, New Mexico, where they have a more lax rule about registered sex offenders, or in Paris. I went to his home in Paris too. So, yeah, you just like, when serial killers kill prostitutes, nobody fucking give a shit.
Right.
Or gay men back in 70s and 80s, whether they're Jeffrey Dahmer or John Wayne Gacy's, the cops never took those victims seriously.
Yeah. I think you're onto something. I mean, the rich definitely have way too much.
No, I'm not claiming all rich, but
Yeah.
there's there are certain rich people. Right now, there's a guy named Jeff Staley and Leon Black. They're both bankers. They're associate Jeffrey Epstein. They're getting big troubles because they're protecting him.
He's dead.
Ooh.
Epstein.
Yes, but when he was alive, they benefit from a relationship with him.
Yeah, sure. Do you think he was murdered?
I mean, all the evidence shows that probably, yeah.
Yeah, the guards all left and stuff like that. I've been having the most bizarre dreams that include Elon Musk, which I can't figure out because I don't really have dreams.
Yeah.
But
what's your general opinion about him?
Well, I can tell you in the first dream, he knew me.
Yeah.
And wanted to take a picture with me, and I refused. I didn't want to be in a picture with him.
Right.
So that was the first, right? Last night, we're in a room of, it was a small number of people. I only remember him, and I was selling merchandise.
Yeah.
And he came over to buy some of my DVDs of shows.
Yeah.
And he ended up buying VHS tapes of my stand-up. Yeah. But I've never sold VHS. I've had CDs and DVDs, and obviously it's streaming everywhere, but he bought like 3 VHS tapes that were with homemade labels.
Yeah.
And I said they're $30 each, and he took 4. He took 3 of those and 1 CD, and I had only charged him $30.
Right.
Now, he was fascinated by the technology. I was using like this square where you tap it. He was fascinated by this technology. And I said, here's where we put in the amount. We can put in any amount you want. Thinking he's going to say like 1,000, 50,000, 100,000.
Right.
Because it'd be nothing to him. He's a fan. Puts in $30 and he taps his card and he goes back to his seat and it never went through.
Yeah.
And I was just there like, so bummed that I didn't have Elon Musk. First of all, he had $120 worth of merchandise.
Right.
I only charged him $30. And, the dream ended with me thinking, do I go up and say...
You must have a therapist listen. I'm curious what all that means.
I don't know what it means. I don't know. But it's interesting because I don't... most of the time, if I have a dream and it involves somebody of power or like a famous person in our business and comedy... we're sitting down having a heart-to-heart. It's a real cool conversation. But he keeps popping in. I don't know if it's because all my videos online, people say I look like Elon Musk, which I don't think there's any resemblance.
Yeah.
But that's...
But you don't hate the guy or anything like that.
I mean, I don't know what to think of him. I really don't. Some days I think he's innovative. Other days I don't know what he's doing. I think he's controversial.
Yeah. My generation.
He's got way too much power. You see what he's doing in the Ukraine war, where he's allowing who gets satellite access to Wi-Fi and that sort of. I mean, that's what the rich can do. And then he didn't even pay for the VHS tapes of mine, Yoshi.
That's the real crime right there.
That's the real crime. You need to go find out where he eats, where he sleeps, his childhood home.
Yeah.
Read the article on him in the New Yorker. He's got a fascinating childhood too with his father.
Talk about
South Africa. Yeah, he grew up in South Africa.
What's weird with his father is that he got some girl pregnant, and this is somebody Elon Musk knows. It's really weird situation. He got someone pregnant. There's someone connected to their family or something. It's really
Oh,
strange.
really? Like incest?
I don't know. I don't know if it. Oh God, I'm sorry. It's been a long time, but I was like, wow, I think she's younger than Elon.
Yeah.
But
One more question about Ghislaine.
yeah.
What's it like to be there in the courtroom for a verdict and seeing somebody's entire life going away? Do you see their face? Is she wearing a mask?
I thought she was prototypical British stoic, no reaction at all. But I think when we got in that morning, there was a quick meeting with Judge Nathan, the defense prosecution, literally a few minutes, stop. 3 hours later, little before lunch, if I remember, they talked for a little bit more. And when it hit like 4:30 p.m., I was like, oh my God, I have to come back
Yeah.
again. Then around 4:45 p.m., Judge Nathan showed up and everybody stood up and said, we have a verdict. And we were just stunned. Because
How long had the jury been out for?
at that point, 3-4 days or something like that.
Huh.
And then everybody returned. And I think she was prosecuted for like 6 crimes. First one guilty, second innocent. So when she said innocent second, I thought for a second, oh my gosh, she's gonna be found innocent with everything rest of
Right.
it. No, she was found guilty except for one thing, and no reaction. Then afterwards, her two sister and brother spoke. And what was so crazy, they instead of taking Uber home, they walk home. So we followed them for like 20 minutes, and all the reporters are asking.
Who'd you follow?
Ghislaine Maxwell's two older sister and a brother.
Wow.
They're walking home, and we follow them, and then they were talking. They're very calm. And by the time they got to the apartment, we followed them for 20 minutes. Then 7-8 months later, during the sentencing, all of the victims spoke. And, I know every one of their stories because I've read them so many times, but it's one thing to read what happened to them, actually see them in person.
Yeah.
Even though they're mid to late 30s or early 40s, but I couldn't help but see them like teenage girls.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say the opposite.
I mean, I just see them like when they spoke, like what happened to them, that the pain is still there. Especially Annie Farmer, who is younger sister Maria Farmer. And when she was abused by Epstein, she didn't want to say anything because her older sister Maria Farmer is an artist. She didn't want to ruin her older sister's opportunity with
Right.
Ghislaine and Epstein.
I've said this for years. When people say, well, how come my limited space on my card? I've never seen that before. We talked so long. When people say, well, if this person was assaulted, why didn't they come forward? That to me is one of the most annoying things somebody can say.
It's not easy. I can't imagine talking about that too. They're not going to believe you, or speculating all kinds of things, like you're imagining things or you're exaggerating and things like that. I think it's a very difficult to do, and I think she was thinking more about her older sister, but too, I think when you're young, you don't even, if somebody mugged you, it's clear you're a victim of crime. But I think sexual stuff, it's difficult to know what happened to you when you're young.
But when so many stories line up.
Yeah, and
Excuse me.
and I think because we don't have adequate sex education and financial education, I think Jeffrey Epstein is powerful because he used sex and money to manipulate people. So when he's dealing with other rich people, he used sex.
Yeah.
And when he's dealing with poor people, he used money to manipulate them. So I think these girls, because they probably didn't have a proper, think about it for a minute. These are like lower class, single parent home, most likely.
Right.
A predator thing to know victims as well. And if especially kids know that if they know that their parents don't like talking about sex, even if they're a victim of sex, they're not going to talk to their parents.
And also in a lot of these communities, they're told that the police are bad.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're not going to help. And what's sad, when Vicky Ward wrote about article about Jeffrey Epstein 2003 Vanity Fair, they talked to Annie and Maria Farmer. They were ready to release for whatever reason, editors at the Vanity Fair cut that part. So I think Annie and
We
Maria
probably know
Farm,
why. Yeah.
they were disappointed, and that was another reason not to trust
Very
journalists.
interesting.
Yeah.
All right, let's switch to a guy that assaulted women that were rich and powerful. Harvey Weinstein.
So that was interesting case because
You went to this trial as well.
yeah, what was so crazy, I think it's ninth floor of LA County court building.
Mhm.
So you go, I think it's 9th or 10th floor. Soon as you get out of the metal detector on that floor, Harvey Weinstein on right hand side and Danny Masterson on left hand side. So same time
Really?
they had two rape cases going on same time.
Hollywood rape cases.
Yeah, and so you go walking straight. There's two double doors. They didn't use the big room. That's the room that they used to do O.J. Simpson case, early 90s. So when you go right hand side, Harvey, left is Danny Masterson. So during break, when I got out, I saw Danny Masterson with his wife standing in the corner taking a break.
Ex-wife now.
Yeah, and Harvey was continuing to stay in his room, but I was going back and forth between two court. I only went like a couple of days,
Yeah. But what's it like to see these people? I mean, I met with Harvey Weinstein.
Oh, what was your circumstance?
I found him very dismissive and arrogant and could care less about me. And I did a project with them.
I think
And it's great he's in jail because I can say it.
Russell Peters said the same thing. He was very, very dismissive. And
we're not his type.
Well, remember the theory thing that I was talking to you a minute ago?
Yeah.
I have no academic credentials. I'm just speculating. But
Right.
both Ted Kaczynski and Jeffrey Epstein were, they skipped grades, a bunch of grades, especially like Kaczynski, 5 grades. So imagine for a second, well, in Japan, we think that's like child abuse because you might be smart, but you're not really emotionally ready to deal with older kids.
Yeah.
So imagine if you're a 12-year-old kid in senior year in high school, like Ted Kaczynski was, what girl's going to talk to you or hang out or go out with you? They're not going to. So
nobody wants to date the bomb maker.
Yes. So I think what happened, Ted never learned to connect with women. And I think this is like a long time problem. And in fact, because he was not able to make connection with women, there was a point Ted Kaczynski thought about becoming a woman too.
Oh.
And because he never had a fulfilling love life, when I read some of the
He
things...
also lived in a cabin in the woods. That doesn't help.
But when I read some of the things he written, when he was bombing people, that was his orgasm.
Right.
And I think Jeffrey Epstein skipped a couple grades. So I think he graduated from high school when he was 16. I think...
Didn't he go to Harvard? I thought he went to Harvard. Jeffrey Epstein.
No. When he was graduating from high school, he graduated little.
Okay, he excelled. Got it.
I think because he was so much younger than the senior class, I don't think he learned to connect with the women his age. So when he was teaching at Dalton, when he was a teacher there, he was interacting with these young girls. I think that was the first time this thing became his like a signature thing where he's obsessed with young girls. But
it must be weird to be in the courtroom with these people, right? That's what I want to get at. Like, what is it like to be around? They're clearly criminals, both of them.
Yeah.
Are you just staring at the back of their heads? Do you get anything from their body movement? Are you disgusted by them?
I'm disgusted what they did, and I'm angry at them. But it was strange that when I was sitting behind the courtroom for Harvey, I hate to say this, but I kind of feel bad for the guy. I know he's a bad guy. He did terrible things, but he looks so lost and powerless now, And I don't condone what he did. The reason why I'm so curious about what led to them behaving this way, I think the primary reason why I'm interested because you have to punish them and deal with what happened to those victims, but also how do we prevent this from happening,
Yeah.
And something must happen to him when he's a child to behave this way, and because I worked in sex business, I meet some of the porn stars and sex workers, and like when you get to know them, they're in porn because they're in the fantasy business, but when you get to know them as a person, people, things are more complicated because they have to pretend like they're whores and sluts.
Yeah. Interesting. And we're going to get into, like,
Yeah.
I'm going to have you back because we have to talk about that part of your life, you bringing porn to the Tonight
Yeah.
Show for actors like Seth Rogen.
Yeah.
And you've so many unbelievable stories. We're just running out of time here.
I just want to make one point.
Yeah, please do.
All these things have one thing in common: whether they're serial killers, they're terrorists, they're business people making these financial decisions that have a devastating impact on everyone else. And Sam Bankman-Fried, he had a similar thing too. This all stemmed from fantasy. See, the problem is there's a fantasy issues that their problem, and they're all in fantasy business, you know.
But we all are, but we don't steal people's money, murder people, sexually assault them. How do some people know not to do that?
I think small fantasy are necessary. You know, if you're some guy in Cleveland, you have you're like a blue collar worker, you're working really hard, things are not going well. It's okay to have a little fantasy. Hey, you know, if I make a little bit of money, I go to Vegas, meet a hot girl, have a good time. That's fine. But when you start talking about serial killer with their fantasy, because why do they keep murdering people? Because their fantasies are vivid. When they reenact actual thing in life, it's never good as fantasy. So they keep killing people. Like BTK, you know, Dennis Rader, he had this such an incredible vivid fantasy of bondage and things like that. And these billionaires also have a fantasy of making a world a better place. And Sam Bankman-Fried, he really had a fantasy of creating so much wealth that he could bring so much good to the world.
That's what I just read this article in the New Yorker, and it's the October 2nd, 2023 issue. And what Sam Bankman-Fried was doing was he was trying to make money and he was giving it all away.
Yes.
So he was altruistic. He
had this fantasy making a world a better place.
Yeah, but he just went about it wrong. And his mom said this. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
I think I want to know.
I saw both of the parents.
Yeah. Do you think that they were complicit?
I don't think they knew what was going on, but now I think they're a little nervous because Sam used their money to buy them properties and things like that.
Yeah.
So,
but they're so smart. They're Stanford professors. They're in accounting and all this sort of stuff. His mom said this, and this, I don't know. We'll see what you said. The reporter said, I asked whether she had ever felt compelled to ask her son if he had done any of the things he'd been charged with. She replied, no. She didn't need to ask. Her son was incapable of dishonesty or stealing, she said. Sam will never speak an untruth, she went on. It's just not him.
Huh. I was talking to this journalist, and one of the benefits of going to these trials, you meet reporters.
Right.
And everybody's gossiping during the lunch. And I met a really interesting gal named Julie Smith. She writes for cryptonews.com.
Right.
And she told me, I think she said, I could be wrong, but I think she said there's one or two jurors who work in special needs cases. They're teachers that deal with kids with special needs and they're on spectrum. We were speculating if he is found not guilty, I wonder because one of those two jurors, because they work with special need kids, that they might feel sympathy for him because he might be on the spectrum, you know.
Right.
His girlfriend, Caroline Ellison, interesting, both of her parents are MIT professors, and she's a math major. When you look at them, I don't think they're evil, but they think so different from regular people. They think everything mathematically, or I don't know, maybe they don't even think about consequence for regular people.
I think they thought, like most Ponzi schemes, that they could move money around and they could always stay ahead of it.
Yeah.
And they didn't. And what happened was the interest rates went way up and people started to pull their money out of FTC, which was his company.
And there was massive panic.
Panic. And then one guy said, this isn't real, and started selling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you believe this whole scam he was running was a lie?
This is something like you probably should talk to your friend Mr. Clementi, because profiling. But based on what I read, it does seem like maybe he was a little naive about the whole thing, you know. But you're right. I think someone like Bernie Madoff would have got away if they didn't have financial. crisis started, because he was getting away for so many years. And I don't know. I do know that when I was sitting there, when they had a second person testifying against him, they were talking about, this person represented one of the institution, and then I think he ended up investing 60 million in FTK. And then the prosecution later asked, like, how much you worth now? And he said 0. And I'm just sitting, 60 million out of 10 billion that disappeared is nothing, but still, it's just shocking. Like, everybody just took a matter of fact, like 60 million is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
You could do a lot of social good, and
in the article, they kept describing he was wearing an oversized suit.
There was this video clip I saw once. He was talking to a room full of people, and they're financial analysts or something. They were talking about FTK's business. But while they were having this big event, room full of investors and other fans of Sam, and while they were talking about FTK's business, he started playing video games.
Yeah.
While having this conversation with them.
Yeah.
And everybody started saying, oh, he's a mad genius. That's why. But I was thinking, like, why does that make him genius when somebody's talking about their money being invested?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, looking back, there, I also went to Elizabeth Holmes' sentencing, and they seemed like a financial market need to make prodigy, man-child, or they just like Steve Jobs of the world, and they just buy into it. So they just assume they're genius. They must be doing everything right.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So they don't really question them, And but when he was playing video games, I thought, oh my God, how can you put money in this guy? He's not even taking this seriously.
Yeah.
But once the entire media proclaim you as king of something, they don't really question you. And I think that's really dangerous.
Well, that's what happened with Elizabeth Holmes. Just one person believed in her. So if that person believes in her, then everybody must believe in her. And it just goes on and on and on.
She was able to seduce George Shultz, former Secretary of State.
That's the one.
And because you seduce one person, he will tell others, like Henry Kissinger and other important people.
Right.
And they're figuring, like, well, if this important person is saying to trust this person, there's one person that Elizabeth Holmes couldn't seduce. It was Warren Buffett. Because he does due diligence and look at the balance sheets, and she didn't give him enough information. So
what's amazing is that she never had a product that worked and got that far. Like, not even close. It was like, it might have been a tissue box.
And Henry Kissinger, who dealt with all the tyrants and most difficult and evil people in the planet, he was terrified of Elizabeth Holmes. Isn't that interesting, Keith?
What was she like in person?
When she walked out by, seemed gregarious, tall, good-looking, professional. What was another interesting thing about her verdict was that the jurors were there, and it's not necessary for them to show up, but they showed up. I swear, 1/3 of women who were jurors are good-looking, blonde, well-dressed, and they showed up for some reason.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And
where were they? They weren't in the jury box, but were they in the courtroom?
In the courtroom, yeah.
I never heard of that before.
They were all good-looking women.
That is so strange.
But Elizabeth Holmes was able to seduce those men, powerful men. And the reason why I'm interested in her and Ghislaine, because those two women understand how these powerful rich men think and behave. They really know them.
Yep.
So if these men are causing a lot of problems, if you get to know these women, you probably could figure out what's going on.
What are you going to do with all this information that you've gathered? Why aren't you using this to write a book or do a podcast? Why aren't you? You're going there. You're doing all this stuff. Why aren't you doing a podcast from the courthouse?
I think if I do something like that, I probably need a partner who, hopefully a woman, hopefully somebody smart and good looking.
Yeah. Well, why does she have to be good looking?
Well, I mean, it's a show business part demands it, But I just have all this idea, but I don't really, I need somebody with academic background kind of, see if I'm going with the right direction,
Yeah.
Going back and forth. But this year I went to Scotland and did 22 shows at Edinburgh Fringe Fest,
Right.
I did a show called Adult Content, kind of talk about my 25 plus years in adult business.
Yeah.
And there's some funny part, but I think a few people that showed up, they were kind of stunned because it's all the really weird, terrible, and wonderful things I learned in that business, Yeah. And I'd like to keep doing that show next year at a different Fringe festival, but I'm adding more of these real examples. So it'd be more enticing for people to want to see the show. But beyond that, I'm not really sure what to do because I give you example. My last year and a half, I've been helping my friend Kareem in Washington D.C. He's writing a book about sexual proclivities of terrorists, and he's covering 7 terrorists. And he's academic. Well, you need a pervert to catch a pervert. So I'm that portion when I'm talking to him
Do
because
you consider yourself a pervert?
I mean I'm a pervert with a lowercase p, but
Oh.
these perverts with capital P's are causing all kinds of problems
Yeah.
in the world. And I think because sex and money is a difficult thing to talk about,
Yeah.
they kind of thrive in the world. And when I talked to Kareem about this, because he never worked in that world or dealt with other sex workers,
Yeah.
it's really interesting. And when you have access to, for example, I know. Do you know Terry Nichols?
No.
Terry Nichols was one of the 2 Oklahoma
Oh,
City.
yeah, of course. Yeah.
God,
God, there's so many of these criminals. How can we keep track of them?
I'm friend with his son Joshua Nichols,
Huh.
and I met his.
What does he think of this whole thing?
Well, he's back in prison, so
Terry Nichols is or the son?
son is.
Oh.
Well, imagine 2 days after Oklahoma City bombing, FBI showed up. They pick you up. You're not allowed to go back to school. Ever since you're 10, 11 years old, you've been shamed because your father did something and you had nothing to do with that.
Do you feel a connection to him because of that?
Little bit. I feel bad for him, and I also feel bad for BTK Killer's daughter, because one time she mentioned, like, imagine if you're a son of Oklahoma City bombing, and
Yeah.
those 2 people, only they would know what is it like to be that person. The reason I mentioned Terry Nichols, because I met his ex-wife, and I find her very interesting, but I don't really know her to ask these questions that I really want to ask.
Right.
I want to know their sex lives, because when you have access to serial killers or terrorists or these billionaires committing these terrible financial decisions, I want to know their sex lives because it reveals a lot about them as
Really?
a person. Yeah.
I want to talk about all that on a future podcast, but what I suspect is,
Yeah.
and it comes back to what we talked about at the beginning, you feel this sense of shame that your father didn't stand up to your stepmother,
Yeah.
didn't stand up to your mother, possibly committed suicide, and you feel this kinship with these children of serial killers or bombers,
Yeah.
because they feel that shame.
They feel shame, but also these topics are so shameful. I think some of them could have prevented if you're able to talk. Like even like I was in Philadelphia recently. I asked my friend to drive me to Bill Cosby's house. He didn't want to do that, but
Yeah, I wouldn't drive you there.
I wonder sometimes why Cosby did that. He's from that generation. Talking about sex is shameful and embarrassing. I wonder he has a sexual dysfunction
No, he's a rapist.
because he's not able to function normally. Maybe he needed to knock these girls out, you know. I'm not saying that's the case. I just wonder, like, when these people are doing, because they have a sexual dysfunction and really weird fantasy problems, they ended up doing terrible things instead of doing a healthy route, you know. And I think
I think the unhealthy route is what they want. I think that's.
You think so?
I do. I think it's a power thing.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure, power
Yeah,
and
I mean,
control.
if Bill Cosby said to women, "Hey, I want to knock you out and have sex with you," they wouldn't do it. It's trying to get away with something. I think.
Yeah, because he had enough money to hire people to pretend to be knocked out, but that's not what it is.
That's not what it is.
Yeah.
My guest today is Yoshi
Obayashi.
Obayashi.
You got it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I think you're fascinating. I really do. And just tell me quickly, like, what are you doing now? Where can people find you? Tell me about your stand-up.
I don't really have anything to promote. I want to do the French Fest in Edinburgh next year. Hopefully more people show up. Maybe one in Iceland, and I think I'm going to visit one in Adelaide, Australia. But my immediate short-term plan is keep doing other people's pod and doing shows. But this Karin Sarajapur. He is Iranian foreign policy expert. I'm really excited about his book. I've been talking to him last year and a half, 2 years, about sexual proclivities of terrorists, and I think these guys want to bring Islamic paradise to earth, but when you look at their background, they have a very complicated issue with their women, their mothers,
Yeah.
and sexual problems, and I wonder, where does religious belief start, and the real problem.
Good luck with that. Don't get yourself killed.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say. Do you have a website?
Adultcontent69.com.
Jeez, boy, you're right in there, huh? What about social media?
Yoshi Obayashi at Instagram. I don't have
Nobody
anything.
can spell that, for crying out loud. Yeah. you're so interesting. You're fascinating.
Thanks for.
I would have you back. Did you enjoy this conversation?
Oh yeah. I used to see you walk around. I didn't really want to bother you, but I enjoy watching your show. My friend Cole Young, I think he worked with you with Russell Peters like a month ago, and he said nothing but great things about you, and learned a lot during stand up with you. Yeah, so
yeah, because I'm completely different than you. I'm not controversial. I'm talking about fabric softener or little things like that, whereas you're going in a different direction. But laughter's laughter, and we need to. I believe in escape through pointing out the small things, and you're addressing with courage, talking about your life. I commend you for that.
Well, and Ricky Gervais always said, like, if you're going to do any show, write a show, talk about things and I think I worked a lot with Jim Norton, David Tell, and I think when you work with them, there's a bit of an edge and a little bit of darkness. Yeah,
more than me. I want to thank you for coming on.
Thanks,
I've
Orny.
really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you being open, and I could see viscerally in your eyes something happening when you're talking about your dad, and it wasn't my intention.
Oh no,
I
don't
feel a certain way.
It doesn't bother me to talk about it. Sometimes people feel bad hearing it, but it doesn't bother me, But I'm blessed to live in the States, and I met so many interesting, but also sometimes terrible people, and they really fascinate me. Like, how did this happen? Why did they behave the way they do? And your incredible guest, Mr. Clement, I'm sure I really enjoyed listening to you guys talk.
Thank you.
He's so great.
Well, I'm going to make him listen to this, and I'm going to come up with questions for the next time I have you on.
He's like a John Madden of psychopath. He does give you X and O, and you talking to him, it's a fun conversation.
Well, thank you.
When he's talking about difficult subject matters,
Well, thank you. I want to let him know his birthday was. I can't say.
Yeah.
Actually, I can't say anything personal about him because it can lead to people finding out information. I want to thank you, Yoshi, for coming on episode 95. What's wrong with Orny Adams? Thank you, Ernesto Hurtado, for mastering and getting up this audio. I want to thank you guys, the listeners, the people that are supporting my Patreon. You'll see this video be up in a couple of days, or maybe even tomorrow. The audio will be up tonight. That's how fast Ernesto works.
There's nothing wrong with you.
Is that it? Put in the camera and say that. Say there's nothing wrong with Orny Adams.
There's nothing wrong with Orny Adams.
I love it,
fantastic.
Dude. Oh, you're amazing.
Your podcast is doing really good things.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. If you want to email me, what's wrong at ornyadams.com. Keep in touch, and we'll have you back for sure.
Thanks, man.
Dude, thank you. I thought that was great.
Yeah.